Welcome to our third episode. Today, make sure to pay attention because we are talking about something very serious and very dangerous. Just like lightning and thunder are not to be meddled with, neither are neurons, since they run on electricity too. Make sure to be safe because what we are going to learn about today might just excite your neurons a bit too much and accidentally fry your brain. So put on your helmets and get ready to learn about how neurons signal each other. So how do they work? I mean, we don't have a Wi-Fi network built inside of our minds, do we? In order to understand that, we must first understand how a neuron, this tree-shaped weird-looking thing, actually works. So here's a network of 3 neurons. The first neuron is here. Second neuron is here, and the third neuron is here. As you can tell, the first neuron in the system is right here. And the first neuron is the one that ultimately receives the signal. So for example, let's say our skin is being pricked by a needle. The skin is over here, and it's signaling to the first neuron by way of the prick that there's something wrong. So the first neuron rapidly transmits its signal to the second neuron by way of transporting the signal across this middle region right here called the synapse. The next neuron receives the signal, transmits it to the neuron after that one by way of crossing a different synapse. The third neuron, for example, let's say there's a muscle here and it's expected that, or actually let's say it's your brain over here, right? And your brain has to realize that there's something pricking it, right? In order to be able to respond properly. In fact, that's not necessarily true, but in this case, let's imagine that it is. The brain will receive the final signal, and it will process that signal by way of local processing and realize that, oh, there's something touching our skin that is sharp. So we must not allow this needle to prick us any longer because it's hurting our skin. And as a result, the neurons, by way of communicating with each other, reach the brain, and the brain eventually makes that final decision saying that we must retract our hand because that needle will do something bad to us if we let it stay there. Let's look at an individual neuron. So this is the neuron. If you recall from the previous figure, this is the start of the neuron, where the signal enters. These tiny branches here are called dendrites. They look like lightning bolts, but believe me, they are not dangerous at all. The dendrites actually accept the signal from a synapse or skin or some organ that is basically requiring that signal to be transmitted to the brain or somewhere else, for example. And the signal over here actually enters the dendrite and goes to this middle part here that's called the cell body, right? The cell body contains the DNA, and also it has the ability to decide whether that signal will continue to be transmitted or not. And in order to do that, it must achieve a certain threshold level. In other words, it doesn't matter how strong the signal is in regard to how much of the signal is being applied, but rather, if it crosses a certain threshold, if the signal is strong enough to cross that threshold, a signal will be transmitted no matter what. And as a result, the signal will be transmitted through this region called the axon. Beneath these rectangles, there's also a thin rod, and that thin rod actually transmits that signal very quickly to the end of the neuron. The thin rod is covered with these rectangle-looking figures that are called the myelin sheath. The myelin sheath wraps around these rods in order to allow the signal to transmit very quickly. The way the myelin sheath does that is by actually covering the parts that are on the axon, and as a result, those parts do not have to, open or close the regions around it in order to transmit a signal, which is really how the neuron works in greater detail, but we will not go into that. This myelin sheath effectively allows the signal to jump. And what I mean by that is, let's say signal enters the dendrite from here, right? It will flow slowly until it goes to the myelin sheath and jumps, slow jumps, until it reaches the end, which are called the terminal branches. And at the terminal branch, it will finally reach the synapse over here in the middle, where chemicals will be released, and those chemicals will attach to the next neuron, which will open the channel and allow the signal to be transmitted. Here's one way the neuron works. As you can see, the signal is initially in the first bulb, which represents the first neuron. But as time progresses, the signal will be transported to the second neuron, then the third one, and then the fourth one. The fourth neuron is actually representative of a muscle, for example, and the battery is representative of the brain. As a result, let's say the brain is signaling a neuron to communicate to a muscle that it must contract. The brain, which is the battery, will send its signal to the first neuron, which upon being switched on or off, will be sent to the next neuron, and then to the next one, and finally to the muscle in the end. I hope I didn't electrify your mind in this episode. Next time, we will go past the basics now that we have discovered quite thoroughly and discover our musical minds. Why does our brain learn better when listening to Beethoven's classics or freak out when exposed to death metal? Tune in next time to find out. Be sure to subscribe and like us below while supporting us and our initiative at the Brain Bunch to educate students on neuroscience and exactly how the brain works. Definitely visit our website as well, thebrainbunch.com. Thank you, and I hope to see you next time.